The most news in the morning. CNN's American Morning. Weekday, 6 a.m. Eastern.
A groundbreaking climate change summit underway in Copenhagen, Denmark. President Obama is going to be there next week.
That's right. And in preparation, he spoke with former Vice President Al Gore, who's been sounding the alarm about global warming for decades. And this morning, the former Vice President and Nobel Peace Prize winner joins us for an exclusive interview.
He's also the author of Our Choice. It's a new book, A Plan to Solve the Climate Crisis. Mr. Vice President, thanks for dropping by. It's always great to see you.
Always a pleasure.
We should let folks know, too, we're going to spend an extended amount of time on this because there's lots of questions to ask. First and foremost among them, I'm sure that you're familiar with what's being dubbed Climategate. University of East Anglia, the Climatic Research Center, all of those emails that were hacked. We saw language like trick used, hide the decline, resistance to Freedom of Information Act requests. I wonder what your thoughts are about this. And on the surface, at the very least, does it look suspicious?
Well, they took a few phrases out of context. These are private emails more than 10 years old, and they've tried to blow it up into something that it's really not. Just to pick one example, some of those exchanges you're talking about had to do with years ago whether or not a study that they thought was of poor quality and shouldn't belong in the scientific report should be excluded from the report. Well, they had exchanges back and forth. It ended up in the report, fully analyzed and discussed. So if you take one little thing from 10 years ago out of context and describe it inaccurately, then it becomes a controversy without any real substance.
Some of them were from 10 years ago, but many of them were far more recent than that, some as recent as last year. But, I talked with Professor Peter Litz, who is the interim director of the Climatic Research Unit. He thought that, in fact, this would have some sort of an impact on public opinion, that people who weren't sure or were skeptical might become more so. What do you think?
Well, that's a separate question. Is there any substantive reason to worry about them? No. Does the noise machine of the climate deniers blow them out of proportion and fool some people into thinking they have substance? Well, that's another matter, and I don't know how to respond to that. Over time, the scientific process whereby all these scientists pick over every detail openly and fully, that process works, and that's the process they followed.
You know, it's interesting in some parts of the book you talk about how it was harder to prove concrete or to have concrete examples several years ago, but as we've progressed in the years, it's gotten easier and easier to point to data suggesting this. Yet there are still people like Senator Inhofe, who's going to this Copenhagen summit, who says that it's the greatest hoax ever perpetrated. And when we talk about public opinion, it's dropped a little bit in terms of whether or not global warming is caused by humans. In fact, we asked it last year, 54% believed that. We asked it just last week, and only 45% believe it. Is it frustrating for you to think that perhaps less people believe humans are responsible for at least some of our climate change?
Well, again, if you put it in a longer context, 10, 12 years ago, when the last of these big meetings took place, virtually no heads of state went. There was still a raging debate on points that have long since been settled. Now, more than 70 heads of state are going to be in Copenhagen. They're close to getting a final agreement. It'll probably be finalized next year after the political agreement that's expected next week. But to the first part of your question, there's an air of unreality about the discussion of arcane points from emails from long ago. The North Polar ice cap is melting before our very eyes. It's been the size of the continental United States for most of the last 3 million years, and now suddenly 40% of it's gone, and the rest of it is expected to disappear within 5, 10, 15 years. The mountain glaciers all over the world are melting, many of them at a greatly accelerated rate, threatening drinking water supplies. We've had these record storms, record droughts, floods, giant fires, unprecedented, all over the world. The evergreen trees of the American West are dying by the millions because the warming trend is making them vulnerable to pests that they could resist in the colder weather in which they evolved. Climate refugee flows are beginning and could reach the hundreds of millions, destabilizing political systems around the world. Sea levels are rising. These changes are now beginning to unfold right in front of our eyes. And the fact that they're distributed globally causes this problem to masquerade as an abstraction. It's not an abstraction for those who are being affected, nor would it be for our children and others who will be affected unless we take action now.
And it's interesting that you say it's not an abstraction. In your book, Our Choice, you also talk about what needs to be done, and moving forward, you say that you have to overcome changing the way we think, the cost of carbon, and the political obstacles.
Yeah.
Right now, one of the political obstacles in the way is this economy. A lot of people are out of work. A lot of people are saying, we can't afford to do anything right now. What do you say to that?
Well, there's been an interesting consensus building around the world that actually one of the best ways to create millions of good new jobs and stimulate the economy is by investing in green infrastructure. When the world went into this global synchronized recession from which we're now thankfully beginning to emerge, interest rates were so low that economic policymakers couldn't use that tool. So stimulus spending was the instrument of choice all around the world. And infrastructure spending was the favored option. Many countries devoted even larger percentages of that stimulus to building green infrastructure in China, South Korea, etc. They see these industries as the key industries of the 21st century. China will overtake the United States in wind next year. Soon thereafter in solar, they're building the largest smart grid or super grid in the world. We have an opportunity to take these new jobs that are going to be created and plant them in local communities here in the United States and create millions of them. They can't be outsourced.
Right. You know, in the book, you lay out sort of a blueprint for how we can solve some of these problems. You talked about solar and wind, but that can only handle a percentage of things. You also talk about nuclear power. And the environmentalists pretty much put a bullet in any new nuclear power development years ago, and now they're coming out saying, well, this has to be a critical part of our infrastructure going forward. If they hadn't tried to kill nuclear power a couple of decades ago, how much further ahead would we be right now?
Just a brief point on the first part of your question, John. More sunlight falls on the surface of the Earth in 1 hour than is necessary to provide the entire world's energy
but
for
there are
a full year.
limitations with the technology.
Those limitations are yielding to dramatic improvements in the technology. But let me turn to your question about nuclear. What really led to the stop, almost a stop in nuclear power, was the cost. It's been going up 15% a year for 30 years. A $400 million reactor is now a $4 billion reactor.
But a lot of that cost was because of environmental regulation.
Well, I'm not sure that's actually the case. Some of it was, but the environmental regulations by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have long since been redesigned to the industry's liking. I'm not opposed to nuclear power, John. I don't believe that it was either the safety or environmental concerns that resulted in the primary obstacles that led to the industry coming to a standstill. It is the cost, and where the global distribution of nuclear power plants is concerned, it is the demonstrated linkage between nuclear reactors and the threat of nuclear weapons proliferation. These cannot be placed by the tens of thousands around the world without putting nuclear weapons technology in the hands of people who we really do not think should have it.